Okay, so we are looking, we're continuing to look at chapter 6 here in our NASM textbook. We're looking at posture today. I'm going to do a quick review of static posture assessments. I'm going to move through them really quick because we already went through them. And then we're going to move into our movement assessments, where we're going to look at the overhead squat, pushing and pulling, and things like that. Which obviously that is sort of the king of assessments, in my opinion. The overhead squat is our favorite assessment there for understanding human movement. So again, going back to kind of what we talked about on day 5, right? Posture, the alignment of the human movement system, and all of its components so that it can produce and control movement, right? It's the base of support by which our body generates movement from. And so that allows for us to have proper, neuromuscular function, which if you break that down, you're like neuros, that's how my brain is controlling things, right? Muscular, it's how my brain is controlling my muscles. When you have overactive muscles, a lot of times we describe that as like, oh, you have a muscle that's too strong, because it is pulling on one side of the joint more than the other muscle is, right? But that's almost like a bad description. I'm guilty of this, by the way. I say that it's too strong all the time because it's a quick, easy way to describe it. But that's not really accurate, because that muscle could be stronger, It's sitting in a shortened length, which means it can't produce as much force as it's supposed to. A more accurate description of what an overactive muscle is that it's a muscle that's firing too often or firing for too much force, and it doesn't know how to work the way it's supposed to. That's an overactive muscle, right? And so like that is going to cause, on the opposite side of the joint, an underactive muscle, because if you got one muscle pulling one way, the other muscle has to kind of lengthen, right? Well, now you're stuck with two muscles that can't function the way they should. And that's going to alter your posture. Now your body can't move the way it's supposed to. So posture requires these proper, what we call length tension relationships, right? That is the optimal resting length of your muscle and the amount of force that it can generate at that length, right? If it's too short, it's losing force. If it's too long, it's losing force. We want those muscles to sit at an ideal posture. So if you have altered length tension relationships, you are going to have altered neuromuscular efficiency. Your body's going to go, oh, okay, well, I need to do this movement. And then it tries to recruit the muscles that are supposed to do that movement, but those muscles are sitting at altered length tension relationships. So now that muscle is weaker than it's supposed to be. So all of a sudden you try to like squeeze and your body goes, oh gosh, I think we're not going to complete this movement. So what it does instead is it recruits maybe a helper muscle from somewhere else to get the job done. Now your body moves in a way, and yeah, you finished your movement, but you didn't move the way you were supposed to because your body recruited the wrong muscles to do that job. Classic example of that is like somebody who's doing a barbell squat and their knees buckle inwards, right? So like they're doing like a barbell squat, it's really heavy, they go down and then they're coming up and they like squeeze like this, right? So what's happening there is like their body leveraged enough muscle from somewhere else to kind of get the job done, but it didn't move the way it's supposed to. That put too much stress on certain parts of the kinetic chain. Did they get hurt? They rack it and they're like, woo, I did it. They give a high five. That doesn't sound like they got hurt, but they did create like a bad habit. They taught their brain how to move the wrong way. And next time they go to do that movement, maybe that's when they get hurt, And that's why this is so important. This is why proper alignment of the kinetic chain is something that we spend so much of our time talking about, And so what we have, whenever we have these overactivities in our body, we have what are called predictable patterns of muscle imbalance, right? And so we see these predictable patterns. These are sort of the things that we talked about the other day, right? We see the feet flattening, the knees caving in, the anterior pelvic tilt or the posterior pelvic tilt in some cases. We see all of these like postural distortions that are caused by muscle imbalances. One muscle on one side of the joint that's pulling too much and one muscle on the other side of the joint that's not pulling enough, right? And so that's usually caused by like repetitive movements. That's going to cause muscle imbalance or maybe like an injury. Sometimes like it's not necessarily just somebody who moved the wrong way. Sometimes it's like they were moving, and then, the muscle just couldn't keep up. And so all of a sudden they pulled a muscle, right? You get a pulled muscle or a torn muscle or a torn ligament or something, some type of injury, right? Well, what's going to happen is your body's going to want to like repair that. And so it builds up like scar tissue, right? And what that ends up leading to is what we call the cumulative injury cycle. And it's this kind of like big circle that kind of, it's what's called in other parts of the scientific like community, we call this it's called a positive feedback loop. And what a positive feedback loop is it's a loop that feeds back into itself. It's like this leads to this, which guess what leads to that first thing, which kicks off the cycle again, right? So the cumulative injury cycle, we see like tissue trauma. Maybe you're going for a sprint, and all of a sudden, like you pull a muscle in your hamstring, right? That causes inflammation, which causes a muscle spasm. That inflammation, like that's a bunch of blood flow goes to the area, and then the muscle tries to protect itself, so it spasms, right? What it does, it squeezes down like this and refuses to kind of let go of those fibers. Then scar tissue starts to build up on top, and you're all bunched up like this while that scar tissue is building. So now it's like taking a piece of paper and folding it and then gluing the top. Now you don't have access to this stuff anymore, right? Because you folded it over top this way. So that scar tissue is those adhesions that we have, right? Well, now your muscle is not as long as it's supposed to be. Now your muscle is in a shortened state because it's, like I said, it's kind of folded over like this. And so now you have altered neuromuscular control because your brain is wired to think that your muscle is, we'll pick a fake number here, we'll say 6 inches long, but now it's 5.5 inches, right? Because there's some of it has, it's all folded up. And so now, because it's like you don't know how to control that muscle anymore, you end up like recruiting the wrong muscles to move a certain way, and now you have a muscle imbalance, which muscle imbalances generally lead to tissue trauma.
Got it. So it just keeps, yeah, I got it.
Exactly. So that's the cumulative injury cycle, right? There's a feedback loop that feeds back into itself. I can't remember. I had a really great way to describe a feedback loop one time that made everybody laugh. And it was like, it's like when you get into an argument with your girlfriend and then you get really upset with each other and you stop talking to each other. And then like you finally make up, but then like, the argument comes back up again and then it leads to a new argument. That's a feedback loop. So our most common postural distortions, right? Or when I'm describing like muscle imbalances before we move into these postural distortions, here are all of the things that kind of lead to this cumulative injury cycle, right? So here's some of the terms that you're going to hear me use a lot. A muscle imbalance is anything that is alterations of the length of a muscle surrounding a joint. So, right here, this is a classic picture of a muscle imbalance, right? Too much movement over here, not enough movement over here. And so this is being pulled at an angle rather than sitting like equally on both sides of the joint. It's being pulled this way rather than sitting level. So that's a muscle imbalance in general. And it's caused by a term that we're going to use a lot, which is overactive muscle on one side, right? Which is a muscle that is in a shortened or a partially contracted state. So you're going to hear NASM use this. They're going to use both terms interchangeably. There's no rhyme or reason to how they choose which term they use. So you want to be ready for both of them at all times. They'll either say you have an overactive muscle or they'll say you have a shortened muscle. Or sometimes they'll even say like which muscle needs to be stretched, right? Because stretching turns your muscular system off, right? It inhibits the neurons, which, causes that muscle to relax, right? And that's why we hold those stretches for a long time. So an overactive muscle is a partially contracted. So let's use an example here. If a client's knees are caving in, right? Well, the adductor muscles, which are those muscles that are responsible for knee adduction, right, are in a shortened, overactive state. That's why the knees are caving in. The muscles that pull inwards are contracting more often or for more force than they should be. And that's what's causing that rotational movement. Now, on the opposite side of the joint, you're always going to have an underactive muscle. And an underactive muscle is a muscle that's in a partially lengthened or relaxed state, right? That's underactive. It's not contracting enough because it's being inhibited by this other muscle. We'll talk about why in just a second. So again, if your client's knees are caving in, so same client, right? The medial glute, and that's a hip abductor muscle, right? The medial glute is in a lengthened state. It's being pulled into too much length. So now your glute is weak and your adductors are strong. And that's why we have this overactive, underactive. And we're observing that when we look at someone's posture, right? You know, if I look and I see someone's knees like this, right, in this adducted state where it's internally rotated, you draw a line from their kneecap down, and it's landing, you know, on the inside here, right? Those are adducted, internally rotated knees. So I know that like those muscles that adduct are overactive, and those muscles that abduct, which would be up at the hip, are underactive. So why does this happen, right? Like let's talk about, and the same thing would be true here, right? Overactive, underactive, right? So why the heck does this happen? Like why does our brain, like why does our body even get this way, you know? Well, there's a couple terms in just our basic exercise science that we kind of need to review here when it comes to like understanding sort of the physiology of muscles, right? And so I'm gonna skip this term right here for just a second, and we're gonna go right down to here. So one of the things that your nervous system is designed to do is it is designed to contract one muscle on one side of a joint and relax the other muscle on the opposite side of the joint. So we can actually see an example of that right here. Reciprocal inhibition. So if I look at a picture here, this is a kind of a complicated diagram, but you can actually see reciprocal inhibition happening in real time. So here's your spine, right? Here's from your nervous system. And you'll notice you've got some signals going this way, and you got another signal going this way, right? So what's going to happen is sensory information is going to come in, right? So this yellow cord here, right, that's a sensory neuron. That's sensory information coming in. In this case, what they're doing is they're smacking the patellar tendon. They're doing that little knee test with the hammer, and they're going to smack that patellar tendon. What's going to happen is information is going to come to the nervous system, and the nervous system is going to go. And what you're doing during this test is you are actually fooling your nervous system. When your doctor smacks you with that hammer, Charlie, have you ever done that test?
Yeah, I have.
So the reason they do that is they're testing your reflexes.
Right.
And it's actually tricking your nervous system because what he's doing is he's smacking. You can kind of see it here. I'll zoom in like crazy. See the little space right below the kneecap right here? That's your patellar tendon. Okay, and it's what attaches your quadriceps here to your shin bone. So your nervous system is designed to protect your body at all costs. If you ever overstretch a muscle, your nervous system is designed to go, whoa, we're stretching too far, and it will pull back in the opposite direction.
Right.
So,
yeah, it goes over that on chapter 2, something.
Yeah, exactly. That's what's called a stretch reflex. And that's what you're actually doing here. You're not actually stretching the muscle like crazy, but you are smacking the neurons that make your brain think that you're stretching the muscle like crazy. So when your doctor smacks you in the knee like that, your brain thinks that your knee is like this, but not just like this. It thinks that you like, ripped it past your thigh. Like, it's being fooled. And so what it does is it panics. And what it'll do is it sends a signal to this muscle right here. So in response, right? In response to this information coming in on the yellow cord, your nervous system sends a signal down this cord right here to contract that muscle that it thinks is being overstretched. Because if it's contracting, then it's not stretching anymore, so it's going to be safe. It's not going to be pulled apart, right? So it contracts this muscle. Now, your nervous system is going to also help out here because here's the thing, like what happens if this muscle contracts while the opposite muscle also contracts? If they're both contracting at the same time, that's going to result in no movement, right? Like it can't go anywhere. That's actually how your body stabilizes stuff. Like if you're trying to hold yourself in a plank, your body's going to contract on one side and the other side simultaneously to hold you in place. That's what stabilization is. That's also why we take when we're training for stabilization, we take pauses. We'll hold and then we move really slow. We're teaching ourselves how to stabilize. And that way we're not just contracting one side and relaxing the other. We're sort of creating contractions on both. But during the stretch reflex, that's not happening. During the stretch reflex, your body goes, holy crap, we got overstretched. So in response, let's contract this muscle and let's relax the opposite muscle. So what it does is it turns on your quad and it turns off your hamstring. And that causes your knee to kick forward, right? Because my hamstring pulls this way and my quad pulls that way. So that process, we have a label for that process. We call that that's not true. We call that reciprocal inhibition. And your body is designed like this whenever you're also trying to move stuff. Like if I have dumbbells in my hands, right? Let's say they're 5-pound dumbbells, right? And I want to do a bicep curl. My body needs to generate 5 pounds of force in this muscle. So if I'm generating force in this muscle, which would pull my arm this way, let's say I generate 5 pounds of force here, and I generate 5 pounds of force here. If I do that at the exact same time, what's going to happen? I'm going to go,
you're gonna go anywhere,
yeah. I'm not going to move, right? But if I generate, 10 pounds of force here and 5 pounds here, well, that'll help me overcome it, right? Or 0 pounds here, 5 here. So that process is called a reciprocal inhibition. Your nervous system is designed to, whenever you contract one muscle, it is designed to relax the other muscle, the antagonist muscle, right? So going back to that client whose knees are caving in, right? Their knees are caving in like this, even though they might be trying to do a movement where they're supposed to go like this. So they are not reciprocally inhibiting the way that they are supposed to. So we have a term for that, and we call that altered reciprocal inhibition. It's the messed up version of what's supposed to happen. And it's when you have an overactive muscle and your nervous system says, hey, overactive muscle, relax. And then the overactive muscle goes, no, I'm going to keep contracting even though I'm not supposed to, right? That's what an overactive muscle actually is. It's an altered reciprocal inhibition. Well, if that muscle won't stop contracting, then the opposite muscle has no choice but to continue relaxing. So now you have a lazy muscle on one side and you have an overactive muscle on the other. So that's an overactive agonist decreases the neural drive to its antagonist. So in a client whose knees cave in, my adductors are turned on so much that they are not letting my abductors do their job. And that's altered reciprocal inhibition. So now, so that sucks, right? like that's a bummer. And that's what happens when you use the same muscles over and over again, and then you don't use the others, right? When you're sitting at a computer desk with your rounded shoulders, you're getting better and better and better and better at shoulder rounding, right? So what that's going to lead to is what we call synergistic dominance. This is another way that you can turn some muscles off, and this is not a good thing. Synergistic dominance is when a synergist takes over for a weakened or an inhibited prime mover. So now, going back to my knees cave in option, right? Now I'm caving in like this, right? Because my adductors are making sure that my abductors can't do their job. Well, now what's going to happen is my body's going to try to use other muscles to try to finish the job, right? In this case, it could be my piriformis, it could be my hamstrings, right? These other muscles that are going to try to squeeze for me to get me back upwards, right? To kind of complete the movement. This is what you see in group exercise classes, or when you see in the gym, you see people who move in a way that they're really not supposed to move, right? And they complete out. They're like, you see everybody doing like body weight squats, right? And they're doing these like, squats while they're in the gym. And you see some people doing it like this. And it's like they think they're following the program, right? They're trying to follow this group exercise instructor, but they're not really moving the way they're supposed to. They're moving in this altered way, So if somebody can't squat properly and they do this, well, this is them trying to use other muscles to kind of get the job done. Their synergist muscles, which are really only there to help, are doing all of the main job. And again, they're not made for that. They're not designed to deal with that level of stress. They're not designed to move the joints in the direction we want to move. And that's why that posture is so important. That's what leads to that overactivity, right? That's what leads to, that damage. So that moving the way you're not supposed to move, right? Like, yeah, I did it, we have a term for that as well. We call that relative flexibility. That's your body finding the path of least resistance during a functional movement pattern. So if I had somebody squat down and they don't have the mobility in their hips, so they cave their knees in, right? Their body kind of did something that looks similar to a squat, right? They kind of got the job done, but they didn't really move the way they were supposed to. It's like, yeah, you did the movement relative to your ability to do the movement, but you didn't move the way you're designed to move. That's relative flexibility, right? That's like, yeah, you got the job done, but you didn't do it the way, it really should be done. Eventually, something's got to give, something's going to get worn out.
It's like the easy way out, like you said, just to get the movement done, right?
Exactly, right? So overactive and underactive muscles on a more neurologic level, that's an example of altered reciprocal inhibition, or it's an example of synergistic dominance, right? Oftentimes, an overactive muscle leads to an underactive muscle, which leads to a synergist muscle becoming overactive, right? And then what that causes is both this altered reciprocal and synergistic dominance, and now your body moves the way it's not supposed to. I like to use knees cave in as an example here, because you can see a great example of both things happening simultaneously. You can see, the adductors are inhibiting the medial glute. So then the hamstring takes over, right? And so it's like, now you have an overactive adductor and an overactive hamstring, and you have an underactive glute muscle. So you can kind of see it happening all in three different versions: synergistic dominance and altered reciprocal inhibition. Does that make sense? Is all that pretty good for you?
Yes. Yeah.
Cool. All right, so that's some of the stuff we kind of talked about, the static stuff. Now today, let's say you have somebody do a static and their posture is not bad. I mean, this honestly, when I was looking at your guys' postures at the park the other day, everybody looked pretty good. I mean, we're exceptionally picky when we're looking at ourselves, Yeah. So if you have a client who walks in and their posture is pretty good during that static assessment, this is where it's like, okay, well now, let's give you a more advanced assessment. Let's look a little bit deeper here and see what happens if we start making you move, right? And that's where we get that's the difference between our static posture assessments like we saw and our dynamic posture assessments, which is what we're looking at today. So dynamic postural assessments are postural assessments that relate to the basic movements of squatting, pushing, pulling, or balancing, right? And the idea here is that you are putting certain types of extra stress on the kinetic chain and seeing how the body sort of adapts to that stress, right? This is the best assessment that you got. The overhead squat is amazing because it puts stress from top to bottom through the whole body all at once, right? It's going to stress the ankles, the knees, the hips, the shoulders, and a little bit in the spine, right? So you're going to go here, arms are going to go up, and you're going to instruct your client to squat down to the height of about a chair and then come right back up. And you're looking to see if they can hold their posture the way they're supposed to, or if they buckle, So the overhead squat, this is a definition you want to get memorized, right? It is a postural assessment that is designed to assess dynamic flexibility and integrated total body strength. So the idea here is teaching your body, you're stressing every part of the body simultaneously to see how you are supposed to move, right? Okay. And obviously your core needs to be active here as well, which is really great. So we're testing strength and flexibility simultaneously. You're gonna have your client stand with feet shoulder width apart, toes pointed straight ahead. I personally, I'm actually a fan of a little foot turnout during squat movements. Like if I'm barbell squatting, I like a little external rotation. During the overhead squat, that's not what we're looking for. You should always be able to, like body weight wise, you should be able to squat without any turning. So foot pointed straight ahead in a neutral position. You know, we look to see if it's flattening or if it's inverting. Have them raise their arms overhead. Their elbows should be fully extended, so they should have straight arms. And they should be in line with their upper ear. So from the side, you shouldn't really be able to see their ear. If it's dropping like this, that's an arms falling forward situation. So your arms should bisect your ears. She's doing palms forward. You actually don't have to do that. You can do neutral if you want. But this is a great overhead squat. This is a perfectly ideal picture right here. Like they really nailed it with this model. Oh, and always, by the way, this isn't actually, I don't think it's listed in your textbook this way, but everybody will tell you this, do it with the shoes off. I know that like 90% of gyms are going to get upset for, you know, they'll tell you not to take the shoes off for your clients because it's like an, you know, safety hazard or whatever. But physiologically and kinesiology wise, like always take your shoes off, because most shoes put your client into they usually have like an elevated heel. So that puts them into a plantar flexed position, right? That makes the exercise easier. Now, you know, you might not find out what you want to find out about the ankles. So shoes off. Now, what you're looking for here, you'll notice if you draw a line from her wrist down her shoulder, it's on the same line. Like here, actually, can I copy this picture? Copy slide. Let's see if this works. You know what? Actually, hold on. Let's see if I do this. Print screen. Okay. Crop that. There we go. Okay. So we look at this lady here, right? Let's zoom in just a little bit. You can actually see if I draw like a line here, this line is perfectly traveling down in line with the rest of her body. That's awesome. That's exactly what we're looking for, right? Rather than like a situation where maybe this line, you know, is coming at an angle like that, right? Like if her arms are falling forward, that's not in line with the rest of her body. That means that she has arms falling forward. She's got overactive lat muscles, right? We'll get to that in just a sec. But then let's take another line, draw a line from her ankle up to her knee. Well, if we look at that line, oops, that's not great. Yep. There we go. If we look at that line, see how these two are parallel? Like if you draw a line from her ankle to her knee and draw another line from her hip to her shoulder, those are perfectly parallel to each other. That's what we look for in an ideal squat. We want to see these parallel lines between the two, right? And then, you know, I'm also sort of paying attention, are her hips sitting level? And, you know, as you can see, they definitely are. But the most important thing that we're looking for really is just that parallel line. That's what we look for in a squat. Now, let's take a look at some altered examples here, right? So you're going to instruct your client to sit to a comfortable position. We are going to look at a couple different spots. You're going to see two views here. Now, Charlie, this is where I don't think this is the first, I think this might be the first time you're experiencing this so far. You do have two different sections of Sochi here. And I'm here to teach you the core, which is your normal textbook. When you get to capstone with Mo, you're going to learn the corrective textbook, which is NASM's CES certification. That will add a couple of extra pieces of data that are not found in your regular textbook. I often will touch on those things in the core though, just because like they're part of the conversation. So for instance, in your regular textbook, you're only going to look at the front view and the side view. But in capstone, you're also going to look at the posterior view. So I'm going to talk about the posterior view today. You're not going to find that in your book, just so you know. I want to make sure you're aware that you're going to see like knees cave out. That's not going to be in your regular textbook either. So there's going to be a couple things that I mentioned today that are actually not in your book, but they will be in your capstone textbook. So
when you say posterior, that means the front. Okay.
It's the back.
The back. Okay.
Yeah. Anterior is the front. Posterior is the back.
Got it.
So let's talk about that anterior view first. So on the anterior view, you're going to look at two spots and only two spots. This one's actually the easy side. You're going to look at the foot and ankle complex, and you're going to look at the knees. Again, ideally, it should look like this, right? See how this is like when we're looking at it, you can see this line here from her pelvis down to her knee is nice and straight. And then from her knee down to her second and third toe. If it's actually coming to your middle toe, which is what a lot of people sort of aim for, that's actually slightly adducted. That's a slight adduction of the knees. So the two movement compensations that we're paying attention to, we're looking at that, right? That's ideal alignment. The two movement compensations we're going to look for, we're going to look to see if the knees cave out, or I'm sorry, bleh, that's not what I said. So see if the feet turn out, right? So if they externally rotate their feet. So I'm going to try to adjust my camera here to show you what I mean by this. If your client is squatting, right? Originally they were lined up the way they're supposed. Actually, here they were lined up the way they were supposed to, right? And then as they squatted down, their ankles got really tight, and they just turned like that, right? You'll start to see this little turn there. If that kind of thing happened, that is a feet turnout situation. That's caused by tight calf muscles. Basically, their tibia can't, if this is the bottom of my foot here and this is my shin here, your shin should be able to come forward like this. But if it can't, what'll happen is it'll rotate the foot in the other direction. It'll rotate it transversely to kind of make up for that lack of mobility here. So that is a foot turnout situation. The other one that you're going to look for from the front is, do the knees cave in? Right? And so if you see the knees cave in like this, right, that is adducted. That's that internally rotated that we talked about, right? Now, just for the sake of argument, you are also going to see, I got to Google this one. You will also often see knees caving out. Come on, NASM. There we go. This is a picture from the CES book. You'll see this version here, right? Sort of a bow-legged posture. So those are sort of the three sort of like most common postural distortions you're going to look for from the front. You're going to look to see, do the feet turn out, do the knees cave in, or do the knees cave out? In your regular textbook, it's just these two. So what muscles are causing this, right? What muscles are causing this foot turnout situation? Well, this is in your textbook, by the way. If you go to chapter 6 on page...
It's on 142 maybe?
What's that?
Is it on 140, 142?
Very close. Yes. Yes, it is. 144 is actually the one we're looking for, this big table right here. See that big table? It's table 6.12. I'll put this here. So don't make the mistake of losing it again. So when you're looking at table 6.12, right, that has this list. Now I'm going to pull up, just because I don't have that table. Oh, yes, I do. Look at that, actually. Thanks, Google. Wait. Oh, where'd it go? Can I get a higher quality version? Not bad. Okay, so here's the table in your textbook, right? So if I look from the view, this is the anterior view, right? So I'm looking from the front, and I see the feet turn out, right? My probably overactive muscles are my soleus, that's the calf, right? The lateral gastrocnemius, that's also the calf. And the biceps femoris short head. So that's what we got listed right here. What's that?
That's like behind on the knee, like on the side.
It's behind the knee on the outside. Yep. That full stretch.
Soleus is the lower calf, right?
What's that?
The soleus is the lower calf.
Yes.
Like,
yep.
okay,
Soleus is the lower calf. lateral is the outside main calf, right? And then biceps femoris is that outside hamstring muscle.
Yeah.
So we are looking at overactivity in these fibers on the outside, this little fiber hamstring muscle right here, this little short one, and the soleus, which is all the way down here. One that I've got listed here, by the way, this is also another one that sometimes causes this, but it's not in your regular book, like I said, is the TFL. Your tensor fascia latae also causes that. That's the upper hip internal rotator, that hip flexor muscle, which eventually ties down and kind of becomes part of these fibers. That's why it's on the list. So I did add it into your notes here. I put the notes from the corrective exercise class, by the way. That's why you're going to see some extra muscles on this list, but you won't see any muscles disappear. You will only see extras. So if I've got a client whose feet turn out, right, these are the stretches I need to do. I need to do a soleus stretch. I need to do a lateral gastrocnemius stretch, biceps femoris, and TFL. And those are going to be really great for untying or turning off those overactive muscles, right? So it's a lot of like stretching, you know, the soleus, the soleus, the lateral gastrocnemius, that biceps femoris where you twisting over, and then that TFL,
Yeah.
right, where I'm reaching away. All that is going to result in, hopefully loosening everything up. But that doesn't solve my problem. The problem is still there. I only untied the overactive side of the joint, right? So now I need to pull those muscles back on the underactive side of the joint, right? The overactive stuff is now inhibited, it's turned off. Now what I need to do is I need to pull it back in the opposite direction. And that's where I'm going to get my medial gastrocnemius, right? So, in this case, the outside of my calf was overactive because my inside of my calf wasn't doing enough work. So, how do I strengthen that? I'm probably going to do maybe some calf raises, but I'm not going to do them just normally. I'm going to rotate my feet ever so slightly inward, and that's going to contract those inside fibers of my calf, right? So now my feet are turned this way just a little bit rather than turned this way.
So it's like, would it be like you said, you mentioned working out the opposite to the muscle that's overactive, right?
Yes, the opposite, or sometimes the main agonist. Sometimes it's not always just the opposite. Sometimes it's also a synergist, right? But most of the times, yes, it'll be an opposite situation. Other underactive muscles, right? We saw the biceps femoris. That's the outside hamstring. That's the lateral hamstring, right? So what do we need to strengthen? We need to strengthen the medial hamstring, right? Where's my list? Right? So we see the medial gastrocnemius and we see the medial hamstring, right? So we got to get those inside hamstring muscles working, which means, again, I'm not going to do an exercise. So if I'm doing something for my hamstrings, one of the biggest mistakes you'll see people make, and one of the ways that you can find someone contracting their outside hamstring, is they'll let their feet turn out. Actually, let's see here. I'm going to pull up hamstring curl. I just Google this, right? I'll bet you I'll find somebody doing it with bad form in a picture in no time. Oh, kinda. You can kind of see it. Pay really close attention. Do you see how her feet are rotating a little bit? See how you can see the bottom?
They're rotating now, right?
Yeah, they're rotating externally. Yeah, that's her outside hamstring contracting more than her inside. So when she's doing this, right, you can see it in this. Nah, that one's not too bad. You can see it when people turn. I have this bad habit myself. That's why I can definitely spot this. You'll see people like they'll rotate their foot in the wrong direction. What that does, that's external rotation. That's using a lateral hamstring, and now the medial hamstring's not getting enough work. So do I need the toes to point in? No, I just need them to stay neutral, right? And that'll get that medial hamstring working. And then you see your gracilis, sartorius, and popliteus. All three of those little tiny muscles, those are all stabilizer muscles. So how the heck do you get stabilizer muscles to work? Well, one of the best ways is honestly just this, doing an exercise where you're standing on one leg, right? That little bit of balance is going to create those, is going to get those stabilizing muscles turned on and activated. So that's actually
like
going
a
to
help. Proprioceptive movement or work.
Yeah, a little bit of proprioception, right? Absolutely. Now, again, see how this list is finished already? There are a few others that often are associated here. You're going to see both of your glutes. Get some butt work in there. That will actually help with the feet turnout. No, it's not directly connected to the ankle complex or anything like that. But again, a lot of this is happening. If your feet are turning out, chances are your knees are also caving in. So that's why those are on the list in more advanced versions of this list. So that's actually, by the way, this is the example we're going to build today. We're going to build a foot turnout program in just a minute. So let's look at the next one. We're going to move down. Let's say the next compensation you see, client's knees caving in, right? So if your client's knees are caving in, what muscles are causing that, right? I can close that. That is going to be your adductor complex, which makes sense, right? Adducting, your knees are caving in. There's that biceps femoris again. Now that one kind of sometimes surprises people, but again, remember the reason the knees are caving, knees are rotating in, that biceps femoris, it turns the foot like this. It does this action right here. So if my foot, you guys can see that, right? Yeah. If my foot is turned that way, that's gonna create this inward rotation in relation, right? When we look at the knees, look at her knees here, right? This is outside here. That's that little short hamstring muscle pulling it this direction. So that's that rotational movement. So the biceps femoris there, and then the TFL, right? We see the hip rotating in like this. Yeah. Your TFL is a hip flexor, but again, it does internal rotation as well. And then the vastus lateralis, which is this lateral quadriceps muscle. So again, that if you look at your vastus lateralis, I want to see a picture of all of them. So here are, that's your vastus lateralis right here. It's this outside quad muscle. So your vastus lateralis, like I said, it's along the outside there. I want to find a picture of it from the side. Lateral view. Help me out. Come on, Google. There. Yeah. So, oh, it's no. Come on. I can never, if I could just draw something in my own head. You know what? Actually, this is kind of what I'm going for here. So take a look here. See how like this is running along the outside? And then do you see how like, oh, I'm sorry, this side. Oh, I'm looking at the medial is what they're drawing here. Crap. I'm never going to find it. Anyway, you will notice there's your biceps femoris, right? Here's a lateral view. There's your IT band. There's your vastus lateralis. Do you see how they all come along to the outside part of the knee here? That's what I'm trying to get at. And they're all tied to the same fascia. So because they all share the same fascia, when that biceps femoris pulls and that causes that internal rotation, your vastus lateralis is part of that movement. So that's why that's on this list here. Yeah, it's a quadricep muscle, so you would think it'd be the exact opposite of this hamstring muscle, and it is in some actions. But because they share fascia, when one gets pulled, it affects the other one. And again, that's that internal rotation. So that's what's causing that knee to cave in. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I don't know if I got lost with all the Googling there. So adductors, biceps femoris, tensor fascia latae, vastus lateralis, and then again, there's that lateral gastrocnemius, that same calf muscle. This is why both of these are often so commonly associated. You will generally see when a foot turns out, you will also most often see the knees cave in. They're just two sides of the same coin, So our underactive muscles list is also going to look really similar. Gluteus medius, right? That's an abductor. Gluteus maximus, that's an external rotator. Vastus medialis oblique, this is another quadriceps muscle. This is more commonly, we usually call it your VMO. And that is the opposite. I mean, they're both quad muscles, right? But this is on the opposite side of the lateralis. So your VMO is that little quadriceps muscle, the teardrop that you kind of see on the inside of your quad, right? So there's the lateralis over here. There's your medialis right there, right?
Right.
So, and then medial hamstring instead of lateral hamstring, same as the knees cave out, right? And medial gastrocnemius instead of lateral gastrocnemius.
And that's on the outside?
Yeah, both of the, well, no, both these are on the inside. Medial is middle, lateral is
got it.
Yep. So so there we go. That's what's going to help, if our knees cave in, that's what you got to strengthen. You're just going to work, a lot. It's just a lot of this. It's a lot of, out. And you'll notice, like, see how I leaned there? That was not proper. I want to stay straight and kick, right? If I lean, that's not, that's relative flexibility, right? Next one we've got, if we look at a knees cave out situation, right? So knees caving out, which is not actually pictured here really. That's what you're seeing. Didn't I have her in this? What was? Yeah. This version here.
Thank you.
Right. So that's actually going to usually be associated with inversion of the ankle, by the way. A lot of times we see ankle eversion where people are flattening in like this. If your knees cave out, usually it's an ankle inversion thing. You'll see somebody squat like this. See how my toes are still pointing forward, but I'm kind of buckling my ankles and then my knees are coming this way. Pretty rare. You don't see this too often. I usually see this in people who, I don't know. You see this in people who wear like basketball shoes like 24 hours a day. Sometimes you'll see that.
So that's knees caving out, feet. That's externally, right?
Invert, yeah. Instead of like everting. Like I said, pretty rare. Not the most common postural distortion that you run into, but it definitely happens. Where'd it go? Oh, that's right. It's not on this list. So this is where we got to look at a more complicated list. So if you go to NASM, by the way, Charlie, if you actually want to download these, you can. Remember that downloads page I showed you yesterday? Go to download.
How do you get there again?
If you go to nasm.org and then scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see downloads.
Okay.
And then not on assessment forms. This is like forms to help you gather data. But if you go down to programming and you look at, oh, no, I totally lied. It is under forms. Sorry. It's right here, postural solutions table. And you'll see that it says static overhead and single leg squat. So you click that and you'll see this like little picture here. And this will have all the standard stuff in it. This will have, the classic overhead squat. So we're looking, feet turn out, knees cave in, right? And then there's the single leg squat. And it has all these muscles on an overactive column and it has them all on an underactive column. So it's kind of helpful. So you can go there if you need that, and it's great. Now there is actually a different list out there. If you Google this, you'll find it. And if you type in NASM CES solutions table, you'll find this version of the table here, which is the corrective one that you'll get in Capstone, and see how much more complicated it is. It has all this, like I said, it has all the same muscles plus a few extra every time.
Right.
And so this is where you'll find knees cave out. So I'm going to zoom in on this list here. What causes the knees to cave outwards? Like I said, pretty rare, but it happens. One of them is what's called your piriformis. It's actually this short little butt muscle that is running from your sacrum over to your femur over here, and it's underneath your glute. So your piriformis is this kind of short little muscle right here. Piriformis. Do you know anybody who has sciatica, where they get that leg pain that shoots down their leg?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. So that is sometimes caused by a piriformis muscle that gets super tight and it starts pinching the nerve between the bone here and the muscle. And that's what you're kind of seeing here. So if they have that problem, this is your stretch. I'm going to do this on my belly. But go here.
Oh, yeah.
Pull. This like figure 4 stretch, or thread the needle, sometimes people will call it, super helpful for piriformis syndrome. That's a really good one to stretch this out. So that's one of our overactive muscles there. Then we see the biceps femoris. Now you'll notice that it doesn't say biceps femoris short head. It just says biceps femoris here. It's the whole thing. It's not just the short little fibers. It's both of them. So like when you look at your femoris, right, you can see the short one here and the long one here. In people whose knees cave out, it's both. So you can just say tight hamstrings rather than just right behind the back of the knee. It's the whole freaking thing. Then we see the tensor fasciae latae again, that TFL muscle. And then this time, it's actually your glutes that are overactive. This is why this is so rare. Like I said, we don't get too many people who have this problem, but your gluteus minimus and your gluteus medius, that muscle that does cause abduction, is actually overactive here. So you actually need to stretch that, usually by doing something like this, where you adduct the leg and actually kind of reach away. That's a really good stretch to kind of get all that loosened up. And now you need to strengthen things that, like I said, usually you don't need to strengthen. Usually these are all muscles that we're like, no, you got to stretch these out, right? So our weak muscles here are going to be the adductor complex. So this is the very rare situation. You know that machine at the gym where people squeeze their thighs together?
Yeah.
And we're always, that machine is so dumb for most people because so many people have knees caving in. And it's like, no, that's the opposite of what you want to do. Somebody whose knees cave out, though, they're the only person I would ever give that machine to.
But that machine, you could also like rotate it and actually
go the other way?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do like that version as well. At the end of the day, though, my problem with it is that because of the position it sits you in, usually strengthens your hip rather than your glute because it's so easy to have bad form on it. But yes, absolutely. I'd much rather have somebody do that lateral stuff with the band like we did in the park the other day. That's a much better version of that machine. But yeah, if they do it with good form, go for it, you know,
right.
Push them out. So adductor complex, we need to come in. So in this case, I'd probably do something, you'll notice one of the other muscles that's underactive here is your medial hamstring and your gluteus maximus. So that's the main butt muscle, right? Now, that's kind of weird because, you know, the gluteus maximus was also underactive in our knees caving in. So why would the opposite movement have a muscle that's overactive or underactive in both categories? Well, again, in this example here, right, with the knees caving in, the gluteus maximus, that's the opposite of what the gluteus maximus does, right? Your glute does this primarily, right? It's in charge of hip extension,
right?
But it also does external rotations. Your glute also does this. So when your knees are caving in, that's internal rotation. So that's the opposite movement. Now, when your knees are caving out, you're experiencing too much abduction. So your gluteus medius is trying to take over for your gluteus maximus. So this is a classic example of what I was talking about earlier. It's not always an opposite muscle. Sometimes it's a helper muscle. My medius is not the opposite of my glute, but it is supposed to help my glute. But in this case, instead of helping, it's taking over. And that's why this muscle's on both of those lists. Sometimes that kind of confuses people. They're like, why is that on both lists, right? Well, in this case, it's an antagonist situation. In this case, it's a synergist situation.
Right.
Either way, though, we need a stronger butt muscle. You know, end of the day, you know, every client we've got, butt city, you know. So what works my adductors, hamstrings, and glutes all at the same time? Well, I can get my hamstrings and glutes by doing a floor bridge, right? That classic, you know, where I just do that like hip thrust. But if I were to put like a ball between my knees and squeeze it at the same time, and then do that, now I'm squeezing my adductors, I'm bridging, which is working my glutes and my hamstrings. So I'm getting all three of my underactive muscles. That's the perfect exercise. So we see a ball bridge with adduction. Or I could do a squat, you know, like I could have a ball on the wall and I could do a squat while I'm squeezing something between my thighs. So I squeeze here while I do like a squatting motion, right? And that'll also strengthen my adductors. So
would hip thrust, like, you know, when you like, would that help out your glutes? And
absolutely, yeah. That's really good for the glutes and really good for the hamstrings. Then if you put something in between the thigh and you squeeze, now you're also getting your adductors.
Got it.
So there are more, obviously. This list is much larger. Oops. You can see it here, right? We've got arms fall forward, we got low back arch, we got excessive lean, we got all these other problems. We are not gonna look at all of them today. We are gonna go ahead and stop there and finish the rest of these tomorrow. I'm gonna go ahead and skip down. I wanna get one more assessment talked about today because it's actually gonna be the same thing. But we are gonna do the low back arch, we're gonna do the low back rounds, we're gonna do all these other ones over the next few days of class. The overhead squat is so big, you know, it's a 5-hour conversation by itself. But I got to teach you other assessments too, so we gotta come back to it. So, like I said, this PowerPoint is a little bit different than some of our other classes. So I'm gonna skip forward a little bit here, and we're gonna go to our next assessment, the single leg squat assessment, right? So the single leg squat is a little bit different, right? By definition here, it's designed to assess ankle proprioception. So, you know, your ankle's ability to kind of understand what's going on in the ankle and what's going on in the rest of the body, core strength, and hip stability, right? So this is all about like mobility and stability, right? So, and what you're gonna do is you're gonna have your client stand, place their hands on their waist. They're going to focus their eyes straight ahead. They're going to squat down to a comfortable position. They don't have to get all the way down to chair height or anything like that. But their foot and ankle and their knee should all be pointed straight ahead. And then they're going to squat down. They're going to squat down to a comfortable length. And you'll notice her knee is staying in line with her second and third toe here. Her hip is still in alignment, right? That's all very, very good in terms of alignment here, right? So they're going to raise one leg up. They're going to squat down. They're going to perform 3 to 5 reps. What you're going to look for in the standard test, you're going to look to see you just at the knees, do their knees cave in? And if their knees cave in, hey, guess what? It means exactly the same thing that it meant earlier when our knees caved in during the overhead squat. So if you got a client who kills it on the overhead squat, you're like, that's awesome. I'm going to give you an even harder assessment and see if we find it, right? And then if they kill it on this one too, man, you can just go ham on that client. They got no postural distortions, wreck them, you know? You can just stretch whatever's tight that day. You can, you know, whatever's feeling a little sore, you can strengthen whatever you want. They're in great posture, you know? But if they did the overhead squat really well and then their knees caved in during the single leg squat, exact same muscles, right? Knees cave in, adductors, biceps femoris short head, TFL, lateralis, lateral gastrocnemius, right? And then the same underactive list. So we'll talk about our other movement compensations like the pushing and pulling on Monday, but for now, I want to pivot out of sort of the foundation here. We're going to get out of that overactive, underactive list. And now I want to show you an example of what it means to write a program for this client, right? Let's say this is, let's look at the real world here, right? So here's a picture, here's a program for a client who has feet turnout and knees caving in, right? This is my client. Now, you looked at the OPT model a little bit. This is a client in phase 1. So all of these are stabilization exercises. And what we've got here, we've got 2 core exercises, 1 balance and 1 reactive exercise. And this section is where I'm going to turn on the underactive muscles. And the warm-up section is where I'm going to turn off the overactive muscles. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So warm-up, will a warm-up generally be to do that, to turn off overactive muscles?
Right, because the whole point is, like, let's say it's me, right? So like I take a look at my pelvis. I have a posterior pelvic tilt. When I squat down, watch how my butt tucks under like this. Right about here, you'll notice I get like a little bit of butt.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes people call that the butt wink. I like to call that old man butt. So that is, again, that's not in your regular textbook, but we're going to learn it, I think, Monday. That is hamstring muscles that are turning off my glutes. So my hamstrings are trying to do all the squat work. And that's why my pelvis is getting pulled this way, because from right, like the bottom of my butt, my hamstrings are pulling down like that. Meanwhile, my abs, rather than just stabilizing and holding my spine in place, they're actively crunching and they're pulling my pelvis up this way. So I'm getting a posterior pelvic tilt, right? Hamstrings and abdominal muscles. My low back is supposed to be pulling this way. My hip flexors are supposed to be pulling this way, but it's not happening. So what I would do if I'm going to go barbell squat today, which I am, actually, which I did, I need to start by turning off that overactive stuff. Otherwise, I'm going to move the wrong way, right? Otherwise, I'm going to squat poorly. So what I need to do is I need to stretch out my hamstrings. I need to stretch out my abs. And then in my movement prep, I need to turn on my low back and I need to turn on my glutes and hip flexors.
Okay.
And then my squat form is going to be really good. I'm going to move the way I'm supposed to, you know? And I'm actually still, you know, that actually wasn't that bad. That demo that I gave you, that wasn't uncomfortable for me. Usually, like when I demo, if I'm stiff, you know, I'm sore or anything like that, and my low back is like acting up, you know, usually it's like, you see that, you know, the wink is really obvious. That was actually a pretty comfortable feeling because I already worked out this morning. I'm still kind of stretched out, you know? And I've been working like, you know, that's the one thing during quarantine land I've been working on like crazy, is trying to get all this stuff to go away. So that's how you address this. You address your overactive stuff in the warm up. You address your underactive stuff. That's why this is sort of called the movement prep situation. It's where you're, you know, prepping to go in and get the right muscles turned on. So here we go. Client, their feet turn out, their knees cave in. We got to fix it, right? So we are going to foam roll their calves, right? Particularly, right? I'd probably put in my coaching tips here. I'd say like, particularly stress the lateral gastrocnemius, right? I'll put a little bit more stress on the outside part of the calves. I mean, I want them to kind of roll out their calf in general, but chances are that lateral side is really the problem there. Same thing with the hamstrings, right? I'll probably instruct my clients like, hey, while you've got your hamstring on that foam roller, just turn your foot slightly outward so you can expose that lateral side, right? Then we know the TFL, that tensor fascial latae that caused that internal hip rotation. We're going to roll right on that. And we're going to roll those adductors for sure, right? Because those adductors are pulling the knees in.
Right. And while they do that roll, would you want them to do all three simultaneously as one?
Oh, no. Yeah, you do about 30 seconds on each of these. So okay. 30 seconds here, 30 seconds there, 30 there, and 30 there. And that's once they find that tender spot. You know, once they find that spot, you know, they may find their adhesion, or they'll find like their trigger point. You know, you can even find, if you ever decide to Google this, You can Google your trigger points. So if you go like lateral gastrocnemius trigger points, you'll see these lists online. I'm not promoting trigger point therapy or anything like that, although personally I like trigger point therapy, but generally these are the most common spots where you will place a foam roller. And these pictures are always just really helpful. I will say when you're this high up and you're really that close to the joint, sometimes a foam roller doesn't work very well because the surface area is so large and it kind of buckles your joint, like especially on the hamstrings. Like I honestly, and I've got tight hamstrings, but foam rolling my hamstrings barely does anything because the surface area is just too large. So instead I use a lacrosse ball. And I don't have my lacrosse ball up here. It's in my gym bag, but I'll get on a bench and I'll sit and, I'll shimmy up to where my hamstring is just at the edge of the bench. And I'll take a lacrosse ball and I'll put it right under the back of my hamstring there. And then if that's not in the right spot, what I'll do is I'll straighten my leg and that'll pull my hamstring down this way, right? And that will, expose that spot that I need to. And I'll sit there and hold for 30 seconds. That's called a pin-in stretch. And it's just a really good way to kind of get in there when a foam roller doesn't really work all that well. We love foam rolling, and foam rolling is the most basic version of SMR, self-myofascial release, but sometimes just not the right tool for the job.
Right.
So I'll find those spots, hold for 30 seconds each, and then I want to follow up. What that does, that kind of breaks up those adhesions, right? Remember that scar tissue we talked about in the cumulative injury cycle, right? That's going to kind of bust all that stuff up. Now, my muscle fibers are exposed. Let's lengthen them out, right? Let's get them stretched out and get them to hold and get them turned on. So now I'm going to stretch my calf, right? I'm going to do a static wall calf stretch, right? So that's the most important thing here, right? I'm going to keep that foot in a neutral position, squeeze the glute, squeeze the hamstring, right? All the way down and really pull that whole muscle apart. I'm going to do a standing biceps femoris stretch. So I'm probably going to go into a position like this. And, that's that one where we cross over the midline there. Get that lateral hamstring rather than just, touching my toes, which is a hamstring stretch, but that's like a medial hamstring stretch, right? So I'm doing that turn so I can get the lateral hamstring. Standing TFL, right? The TFL is a hip flexor. So I'm going to go into hip extension. It's an internal rotator, so I'm going to go into external rotation. So I'm going to turn my foot away, keep the hip square, and lean away, right? And that's going to get in that TFL. And then a standing adductor stretch. I'm going to lunge to the side. Toes are going to stay pointing forward. And I'm just going to stretch out that inner thigh there. So now all my stuff's turned off. Now, what I can do is when I get into this activating stuff, now my muscle on one side of the joint is not turning I'm not experiencing that altered reciprocal inhibition anymore. Now my muscles that are supposed to fire can fire. They can do the job that they're supposed to. So now I can do my floor bridge, right? So I can go into those classic, just like hip thrusts, right? So floor bridge, I would just be on the floor and I would raise, right? Modified side. Oh, there's all the stuff we did in the park there. I should have this. I should know exactly where I'm going. The modified side iso abs with hip abduction. So that, side abs, right? Side iso abs would be a full-on side plank. Modified, I would just bend my knees, and then with the hip abduction, I'd be doing this.
Yeah, the ones we did at the park, right?
Exactly, yeah. So I'm working on that butt to pull it away. Single leg balance with reach. I'm gonna stand on one leg. Now, you'll notice I put in the coaching tips here. The single leg balance with reach, as an exercise, is actually 3 parts. It's forward, sideways, and back. You'll notice in the coaching tips though, like I don't need the forward, right? Like that's hip flexion. That's not that's not part of this movement compensation. So all I said was only do the frontal and transverse planes. So my hands are on the hips, and I would do frontal, and then I would do transverse. I would swing. See, I'm turning my foot. It's like I'm opening a gate, right? So I go frontal, transverse, frontal, transverse. And that's the single leg balance with reach. I'm reaching with the leg, right? And then a squat jump to stabilization. I'd be right here. I'd squat down, I'd jump, and I'd hold. I'd jump, and I'd hold. And that is going to turn on my glutes, my abductors, which are my glutes, and it'll turn on the right part of my calves, and it'll turn on the right part of my hamstrings. And hopefully that will get my feet to turn the way they're supposed to. Then I can write a workout, right? Let's go do some barbell squats. Let's do a deadlift. Let's do a step up to balance. And let's finish it off with some walking lunges. And there we go. I wrote a workout. It's leg day, Well, now they can move the way they're supposed to. I'm going to be less worried when they're on that barbell squat about their knees caving in. Because I turned off.
I was actually curious about this, Brad. Because I thought this what you're showing right now was actually a workout. So you could do that, and then after that the workout follows, right?
Yeah. So you haven't. Yeah, that's because you haven't been to our program design part yet. So this is the resistance section. This is sort of what you think of when you think of like leg day. This is like when you think of a workout. This is what you're thinking of. But when we write workouts, we start with 10 to 15 minutes of getting the body prepped before they go in. That way they don't move the way they're not supposed to. We're not going to have that guy on the bench press. Our client's not going to be that guy arching their back like crazy. You know what I mean? Hopefully. I guess it kind of depends on how stubborn their muscles are. So that is sort of our example program. That'll be up on Canvas today. It'll come through the email when I email you. And yeah, there'll be a link to that example. There'll be a link to your homework. It'll be up on Canvas, and it'll all be up on the YouTube page and everything. But yeah, do you have any questions?
Oh, Brad, man, good class. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a fun one, right? I love this class. This is a fun class. I mean, it's a little less technical than some of our others. I want to make sure I know where we're going tomorrow or Monday.
Monday.
What is Monday?
You said we're going to talk about like the pull push, I think, or?
I think so. I think it'll be the pushing and pulling. Yep, pushing, pulling. Yeah.
And that's still all part of chapter 6. Yeah.
So we'll just look at pushing and pulling, and then we'll build an example lumbopelvic hip complex dysfunction. So we'll be building an example of a client who has an anterior pelvic tilt. That part of the overactive stuff that I didn't talk about. Obviously there was more to the overhead squat. So we'll finish some of it tomorrow, and then we'll finish it up as we go through the rest of the class. All right, man. Dude, have a good weekend.
Yeah, likewise, Brad. Quick question though. So
yeah,
like I said, how I started kind of late. I'm trying to go over like the chapters that I missed. So just to touch up on that. Chapters 2, 3, you guys skipped 4 and 5, right?
Yes, 2, 3, skip 4 and 5. Not that 4 is not important. It's just we're gonna do. I didn't do 4 is not in this mod.
Skip 5 also.
What's that? Yeah, 5 is, so 2 is the kinetic chain. So 2 is muscular, nervous, and skeletal. 3 is cardio. 4 is metabolism, so skip that. 5 is, movement science, which is like when I say adduction, when I say abduction, when I say lateral, when I say medial, that's chapter 5. And then chapter 6 is assessments. I don't think you necessarily need to read all of chapter 5. If I were you, I would just watch the video that I did. That should have plenty of info.
Okay, sounds good.
Cool, man. Yeah, don't I mean, do your homework, but don't study like crazy this weekend,
No, I just kind of like, Like I said, I'm really interested in all this stuff, man. So I kind of like going over it and just,
I love it.
Refreshing what I learned. Like for example, later on, I'm gonna go over this class again. Watch it again. And that's,
Well, cool.
All right, Brad. Well, thank you. Have a good weekend. I'll see you Monday.
Yeah, you too. Do something fun. All right, see you guys.
Bye.